Okay, well, I better get a chance to give it. First of all, I just want to get clear, because I didn't maybe hear everything. Is there disagreements over the universal basic income, and if so, what they are? And also, then I just want to maybe, if people would say a little bit more from Age Action, because I think the point you make about renters is really important. I mean, I've got a case that really sums it up at the moment of a couple who were, one of them at least was working. He then got early onset Alzheimer's, but they were paying a very high rent, and they were on a HAP tenancy, and they were paying a big top up, which in itself is wrong, right? That people are having to pay big top ups. But then he got early onset Alzheimer's, could no longer work, his wife can't work, and they've got a massive rent bill that they can't service. And it's like, what do they do now? And they also can't meet their heating bills, whereas before their income might have allowed them to do those things. Now they're absolutely goosed. So I just think that, to me, is a sort of red flag for what we're going to see a hell of a lot more of that. So maybe you'd like to comment on that. And then the other piece is just about the more and more people I get, because on the one hand I agree we have to lift everybody out of poverty, and a basic income should be such that you lift everybody out of poverty, but you also then have to reward people for actually going to work. And in fact, what's often happening at the moment is people are being punished for going to work in effect. So if you go over particularly the social housing income threshold, you're banjaxed. And I'm dealing with a family who are just over that threshold, and they're not entitled to HAP, they're not entitled to social housing. We've had to fight to establish if they're even entitled to emergency accommodation. We had some families who were in that position who were being threatened with eviction from emergency accommodation. So I just think we have to, on the one hand, make sure that people's income is above the poverty level and at a dignified level, but also then ensure that you don't get punished for working. And, you know, to my mind, things like HAP payments should be available. I don't agree with the HAP system. I want social housing, but insofar as we're not giving the social housing, that you get stuff like that to make sure that you can actually live and survive. And anyway, that's as much as I can say in the time available. So.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, just one point to make in relation to all of this. We talk about rates, we talk about limits, we talk about structures. One of the things that's very often forgot about is I suppose, the practical application. So moving from welfare into work, there is a time lag. And that time lag is, if you have a social welfare payment, if you have supports, and if you have the possibility of retaining those or your circumstances changing, one of the biggest concerns for people is, if I do this, what will happen to what I have right now? And if it's affected, how long will it take to fix that? So the perfect example would be, somebody would move from social welfare, particularly a job seekers payment, and they're looking at returning to work. And you identify for them the range of supports and the range of incentives and the range of everything that's there. The concern they have is, if I give up my payment, or if my payment is taken from me and I have access to these other things, what will I do during the downtime? Where will my income come from? How will I be able to support myself? For example, the payment that's available under supplementary welfare allowance system, which is the payment pending wages. Very few people are aware of that. Very few people have access to that. Very few people engage in that to support them to return to work. So having things there is not the same as having a system and a process that supports and informs and encourages and makes available that. And that's a very important point to remember in relation to all of these things.
Okay, I want to bring in this one, please.
I agree with the heart of what you're saying, and just the situation of older persons in the private rental sector really, I think, crystallises a lot of the issues facing older persons in Ireland in general. And you know, that situation you described, I mean, when people develop additional care needs as they age, you know, I mean, never mind the problems or the difficulties facing homeowners trying to get adaptations, but if you're in the private rental sector and suddenly you need, you know, wheelchair access or something, you know, I don't know what options are available to you. And similarly, you know, if you have additional needs around heating, you know, again, very difficult for a homeowner if you're in the private rental sector. Again, it can be even more complicated. And I suppose one of the things this raises for us is the importance of, the pension as the bedrock of the income for older persons, and, protecting that and ensuring that, as we see longer working lives and older persons able and empowered to, stay in employment for longer, which is great and we fully support, and that's why we advocate for the abolition of mandatory retirement as well. But that it's not a situation where older persons are remaining in work into their 70s or older because they have no other options. We want pull factors. We want, them to want to contribute to society, to maintain those social relationships, to continue to grow as people, to learn, all these things. But we don't want it to be that they're working because they have no other options. And if people are in the private rental sector, and if that private rental sector isn't, changed radically in terms of, how it's regulated and the protections for tenants, and also similarly their access to the pension, if the pension isn't improved, if the pension doesn't provide people with an adequate income, the situation's just going to deteriorate.
Okay, I have to move on.
John had one quick.
Do you want to come in quickly?
About the basic income
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just to clarify on that, I suppose there's a few things that are important to pick up from the international literature that were ignored in the report, and the Commission's report. For example, the international literature shows that in terms of labour market participation, the conventional option, which we have at the moment, and UBI have very similar outcomes in terms of labour market. What they're different on is well-being indicators. Basic income always comes out ahead on well-being indicators, and it does better than the conventional option. That should have been mentioned in here. It was completely ignored. In fact, the impression was given within the report that the opposite was the case. They ignored well-being, but that the opposite was the case in the labour market situation. And the other piece that I mean, I could go on and on, but one other point, it's got to do with the estimated cost of basic income. They estimated that the cost would be so high that you'd have to have a tax rate of 65% and so on. And the problem is that you can have any cost you like on a basic income simply by changing the amount you're going to pay on the basic income. Okay, and even the ESRI's recent study carried 4 different options, or it came to 4 different countries because they looked at 4 options. So a basic income could cost you, according to them, 10 billion, 37 billion, 41 billion, 50 billion. Interestingly enough, the communication that the ESRI did focused completely on the 50 billion. However, all proposals which have been made in Ireland were made on the basis of exchequer neutrality, hence focusing merely on gross costs. And these are just gross costs they're talking about. Makes no sense whatsoever. We have put a profound amount of work, I mean many hours, thousands of hours of work into showing how you move from gross to net in this. Because why? People are already getting welfare payments. They're not going to get basic income on top of it. Do you know what I mean? So it's like sometimes people get miss the point of sort of the real evidence that needs to be got at to show whether or not we should move towards a basic income. I think we need that evidence in place, we need it out there, and we need it to be done on a credible basis by credible researchers, and not to be done by people who set out to do a hatchet job in the first place. And there's plenty of those around. So I think that's the kind of approach we're talking about. And we will follow the evidence, and we will go with whatever the evidence is telling us. The problem we have in much of the debate around basic income is that much of the debate, particularly at the level of politicians and political parties and many people who lead in policy, is that it's not based on evidence at all.
Okay. It's also disappointing that they cite the Finnish as if it didn't progress for a particular reason, when in actual fact the reason that pilot wasn't progressed is completely political and about a change of government and nothing to do with the UBI at all itself.
They also did not give the positive outcomes.
Yeah, exactly right,
that were
exactly
there,
right.
even from the partial one that's there.
My own particular bugbear.